Thank you for joining me this morning, Kara. It's nice to meet you. Can you introduce yourself to the INFORMS members?
Sure. My name is Kara Morgan, and I have been an INFORMS member on and off for over 20 years. I currently am at a small consulting firm, Quant Policy Strategies, and I'm a decision analyst by training.
Okay, great. So I looked you up, and you've had a remarkable career in the analytics industry, including senior positions at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration and the Center for Foodborne Illness Research and Profession. How did this all start? How did you start? How did you get there?
Yeah, it wasn't a straight road by any way. I was always a really mathy kid. And so I had a great high school math teacher, and I just loved it. It just seemed very natural to me. Went to college and majored in math because I had so many credits in math. I graduated. I went to Michigan State for undergrad, and at the time they had a math education degree or a straight math. I didn't want to teach K-12, so took the math degree, but really had no idea what I could do with that in those days. Right. And it kind of took so I worked my parents had moved to DC by then, and I worked in a consulting firm, a DoD contractor, that I learned modeling and logistics and regression and data and all kinds of software. It was a great experience, but I really didn't want to stay in DoD contracting. That wasn't my passion. So I went back to school, went to get a degree in environmental science, learned how to do mathematical models there. And then that still wasn't quite enough. I liked doing the models, but I wanted to know the so what, so people are using these, how are they using them? What are the decisions? So then I went on to get my PhD at a program called Engineering and Public Policy at Carnegie Mellon.
Okay.
Where that's really where I was able to tie the quantitative skills with kind of policy decision making and see where that connected, how it works, how it doesn't work. And that's really where I've been working now since my whole career.
Great. So you found it finally.
I found it. Yeah.
There. That's great.
Yeah.
So what's something you've learned from this decades-long career? Have there been any surprises along the way?
Yeah, I've worked in the public sector, in the government. I've worked in private sector. I've worked in academia. So I have a really broad range of experiences. And so, of course, I've learned lots of things. I think one thing that is interesting is how when I was at the Food and Drug Administration, I was working on some issues that were being covered in the media. That never happened to me before, where people were talking about things that I was working on.
Yeah.
And really seeing that the difference between the way the media portrayed it and it was being talked about in articles and what I knew to be true. I don't think there's anything really, intentional about that. I think it's a combination of, media trying to get people to pay attention to their stories. Public relations people in the government aren't necessarily sharing all the details of things, and they're always going to be painting things in a good light, as all PR people do. So, but it was really striking how my knowledge of what was going on wasn't really reflected even at a high level. So ever since then, I've just been much more, I don't know how to say it, more kind of different. Yeah, I interpret things in the media in a different way now, kind of knowing that, and then kind of, I guess, giving people more benefit of the doubt based on what you're hearing in the media.
Yeah, interesting. So as someone who works in sort of the media aspect, I feel like you said, it wasn't intentional, but it's just something's timely. You got to get that out there with whatever little information you have. So
right, and you only have so much space. Like that's the thing. A lot of these problems that, of course, people are working on for years are very complex. So you need a 3-paragraph article. You just can't really add all the detail that I might have thought was important, but it's somebody else making that call. So
that's interesting. Yeah. So can you tell us how your work helps to promote data-driven decision-making and good outcomes?
Yes. So the good outcomes part is related to strategic planning, I think, and it's not that's not as much as the quantitative part. The quantitative part, so having good outcomes is accomplished by making sure you set out clarifying what it is that you want to accomplish. And a lot of people kind of take that for granted, certainly in the private sector, it's more straightforward in terms of profit and so on, but there might be other objectives. And in NGOs in the government, I think if people don't spend as much time as they should kind of thinking about what is it that I'm trying to do with this decision. And then the data-driven part comes in terms of linking the data that you have or the data that you need, that you wish you had, to those outcomes that you care about, and developing metrics that can kind of report progress along the way. And like a lot of times the the way people go about developing metrics is more based on the data they have instead of the data that's really linked to the outcomes. And so that's kind of what I try to talk with people about, is having that whole logic model, if you will, the picture of what it is you're trying to achieve and how all the things you're doing are related to that, and having the data and metrics to measure that.
So you work with companies to help them do that, or what are you doing with that?
So I didn't really want to talk about the company.
Oh, no, well, not your company, but I wasn't sure.
Yeah, I mean, in my career,
Yeah.
I could say so. Yeah, so in my career, so a lot of the work I did at the Food and Drug Administration was that exact thing. We'd have a new piece of legislation, for example, and there's a lot of stakeholders at the agency and outside the agency who were involved in implementing the legislation, and we had to develop, they would say risk-based metrics, to say that we're on track, because we're asking. So like, for example, the produce rule was something that I worked on when I was at the Food and Drug Administration, where the legislation asks companies to do a lot more than they had been doing in terms of collecting data and tracking things. And so we wanted to make sure that there were clear measures of impact of that they were having an impact on what. So the first intention is just like, oh, we'll just keep track of our number of inspections and see who's compliant with the inspections. And that's not exactly, yes, you can talk about compliance with the law, but really the stakeholders, the private sector and public sector, all kinds of consumer advocates want to know, is this making food safer? So having the data to do that is much more difficult than having the data to talk about whether or not your inspections were compliant and how many inspections you've completed.
Right.
So that's the kind of work that we would do to try to kind of nudge people to think about not just reporting on the data that you have that is in some way linked to the outcome, but really thinking about how can I really, the outcome that everyone wanted from this was to have safer produce. So what are the ways that we can measure that? It's really hard. It's really difficult. There's lots of uncertainties, but trying to nudge people more towards that idea of having the data that they need to reflect on the real outcomes of their work.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that example. Yeah. So I didn't realize that you have worked in almost all of the paths that you could take in this field, right? So do you have advice for students that are trying to choose their career? I'm throwing this one in.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I loved my time working for the government, and I think anyone who works in a regulated industry would ideally spend some time, even if it's just a fellowship or an internship, working for the government agency that regulates that industry, and vice versa. And if you want to go work for the government, maybe spend a couple years first working in the industry, because it was really surprising to me, and I never set out to do one or the other. It's just kind of how things evolve.
Right.
How many people only work for the government, or work for the government, and then when they retire, maybe go work for private, or only work for the private. And there's such different worlds, and there's so many touch points, but it's more adversarial if you don't really understand what people are motivated by and what they're being driven by, and being able to convince people that they shouldn't be at odds, right? This should be a collaborative effort, but because their outcomes, right, are the outcomes that their organization wants are very different. But a lot of the things that they're doing are overlapping and connecting. So that's my advice, is to have both experiences if you can.
Yeah.
And then academia is a whole nother different animal. But I think that I was fortunate enough to have that experience kind of after my government and private sector. And I did find that there's not a lot of people in academia who have that kind of real government experience. And it's not as valuable for a lot of the academic metrics, but it's valuable for because a lot of our research projects are collaborative with the state, or we had, when I was at Ohio State, we did some projects we had a Gates Foundation grant, and we had a USAID grant with the Ethiopia government and the Kenya government. So just kind of having an understanding of how government works in general, and then me learning kind of how their food safety work was different than US. It's a lot of things to build on, hopefully. And it gave me a better base to be able to do that work.
Yeah, and understand what your collaborators need from you. And
absolutely,
that's great. Thank you. So let's go even younger. How could we promote these analytics careers to high school students? What would you think we could do?
I think this is a great question. I'm not sure what INFORMS is doing on it now, but like I mentioned earlier, when I even out of college, I had a math degree. I think it's different now in college. There's more kind of analytics tracks and so on. But I think there's a lot that could be done. I don't think data science has really been incorporated yet, like in the STEM discussions. A lot of, funding and research and focus now on STEM in high school and even in middle school.
Yeah.
Some work to kind of get data science to be a part of that.
Yeah.
Analytics also might be coming up in some high schools, but there's usually like a computer science, then there's like math, maybe a statistics, but it's that kind of cutting across piece and a really applied piece, I think, is missing.
Yeah.
And so I think having, getting some kind of discussion about data science earlier on, so that people who aren't even, maybe they don't want to take a calculus class, but they could still be really good. It's almost like, more of a in the management area, data management. A lot of the data management jobs aren't as mathy, And then I also think across the board, and analytics certainly is included in that there should be more interaction between people who have jobs and kids in school, right? So middle school, high school, I really wish there was more constant, pulling experts from the community with their parents or, people from the town or whatever to talk to people about jobs, because there's still a huge disconnect between what people are, what kids are learning in school and their understanding of what the jobs are out there. So I would love to see more of that.
That's a good, and for any industry, really, because when you're growing up, you're like, do you want to be a doctor or a this, or, you feel like there's this handful of options,
Right. And based on your own experience.
Right.
Yeah.
And I always find it so fascinating, and that we have to choose this career path at this young age when you're, picking what college you want to go to and your majors and stuff. I didn't know then. And I think a lot of people feel the same way, but you're forced to decide then. And without having those people and those people with experience come in and tell you about these jobs that you don't know exist.
Right. And even compounding that, and I think that's been true since I was young, that you just have this limited view of what jobs that people have based on your parents or your friends' parents. On top of that, I was on the State Board of Education in Ohio for a couple of years, and there was a study, I think it was an organization called Knowledge Works, that talked about the future jobs. And what they said then, and this was a couple of years ago, is that the kids that were in kindergarten at that time, by the time they graduate high school and are out in the job market, something like 60% of the jobs will be jobs that don't even exist right now. The world is changing so quickly.
I was thinking in the reverse. They won't exist then?
Yeah, no,
they don't exist now.
There's no job title. There's no person with that job title now.
Right.
But, and that's true now, like in the analytics field, like data managers, chief data officers, like those didn't exist 20 years ago.
Yeah. So
that's just going to keep happening. Yeah. So how are kids supposed to know, what, and unfortunately, like colleges aren't necessarily connected to that all the time. They're more focused on kind of academia. So having another organization who can really say, hey, there's all these people, if you like these kind of classes, here's like 18 different careers you could have. Like, I think that hopefully that'll in the future be something that starts to develop, because I don't know how people find jobs now. It's like mine was such a random path. I was here, I was there, I was bumped. And so hopefully there can be something a little more, something that you can plan for and have a plan for.
Yeah. And just as an aside, I actually went to the DEI ambassador session yesterday, and one of the projects is a strategic initiative for this, trying to get this analytics careers in high schools. So they did one they tagged on to an engineering seminar that was part of their university that was already going to a high school. So they tagged on to that. They gave them an hour. They just said, what is OR? And then they did like a quick engagement activity. They did something with social media, but then explained what they did was OR, hopefully we're going to try to do something more.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you think about it, like we always talk about our brand of OR and how people don't know what that is. Maybe that's the way to start. Is by, having it in K-12 and just making it a part of the normal things that people do, and
I think they said it was freshmen and sophomores in high school. So they're thinking maybe we go even younger, but once you get to seniors, they're kind of already, well, they usually should be deciding by then. So you're the current chair of the INFORMS Advocacy Governance Committee. Can you tell us what this volunteer work entails for anyone who doesn't know about this committee, why it's so important to you? And then I want a 30-second elevator pitch to convince other members to get involved.
Okay. Yeah, I was really excited when I learned about this committee a couple of years ago. So I was on the committee first, and now I'm the chair. And it really is especially after working in the government and kind of seeing how things work, it's been something that's I wanted to work more on, and that is connecting people in the government with resources that can help them do things better, right? And so there's often a disconnect between there's often not enough expertise in the agencies to do things like QC a model or think about what kind of modeling approach should be used. And so the Advocacy and Governance Committee is about trying to bring operations research and analytics to the attention of policymakers. We're mostly focused on federal level now, just in terms of bandwidth.
Yeah.
But a lot of the work has been done on the Hill, like talking with NSF, and getting language into bills about funding and including OR and analytics in kind of basic STEM things.
Yeah.
I've driven us a little bit closer to working with the agencies and trying to find champions within agencies who are interested in doing more with analytics, but don't have a broad, no one's going to have the broad expertise that INFORMS has. So trying to position INFORMS as a resource and figuring out what that means. It could be, and we've been trying to get members on advisory committees, trying to connect people, even if it's just like, hey, we wrote up this, approach, can we run it by someone? And helping make those connections. I think during COVID, we saw a lot more of that than there used to be, with kind of local and state agencies connecting with the experts at their universities on, public health and things like that. So that's kind of the model. And the question is, how do we kind of find the right people in each agency and then facilitate those connections between what that agency needs and the members that might be interested in helping. So the 30-second pitch is, if you want to, you're interested in helping the public sector, helping government people make better decisions, but you don't want to leave your day job, this is a way that you can do it as an INFORMS member. And the INFORMS is kind of taking a lot of the hard work away in terms of finding the right places and identifying the people and making the connections. And then the idea is that those relationships can flourish under whatever terms make sense.
Yeah.
So it's really an opportunity for people who are in academia or in the private sector who, have great knowledge and experience that could help the agencies have a way for them to work directly with those folks to provide their expertise and help them make better decisions.
Okay. I like that you threw in and can keep their day job.
Yes.
Because although as important as the work is, like you said, INFORMS does help as much as they can. You're the thought leaders. We're trying to connect you and hopefully, So I like that. Thank you. We're in Indianapolis right now. I assume you've been to many other INFORMS meetings, conferences. Describe an INFORMS annual meeting to someone who's never attended one.
Okay.
What would be your...
So I have been to a lot of meetings, and one thing about INFORMS that you need to know if you're a first-time attendee is it's very, 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 very big.
Yes.
There's lots of different types of organizations involved. There's a lot of technical overlap between the sessions, and it can be very overwhelming if you just kind of scroll through all the talks and try to decide. Yes. So my advice is to find a society or section. Usually each society or section has a track. They're in the same room the whole time. They almost always have at least Sunday and Monday, maybe Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and kind of find a home at least for your first meeting.
Yeah.
That's really how I came into INFORMS. My professor was in the Decision Analysis Society when I was at Carnegie Mellon, and I came with him. And I was in the Decision Analysis Society. And then I realized there was this larger organization around me. But the first couple of times there was a small group of us that were all in grad school at the time. We called ourselves the third generation because the decision analysis field had been around for about 30 years at that point. So we were kind of academic generations. And we're all still there. We all still come together. We know each other. And now they all have students and it's spread out more. And a lot of the luminaries in the field are still coming to the society meetings and getting, and so it was I won the Decision Analysis Student Award in 1999.
Oh.
And it was just a great environment. Everyone has the expertise that you need. Everyone has their own thoughts, people giving you feedback. Yeah. So I also encourage people to present, if you find your right place and present, it's a great place to get that kind of feedback. Right. And then look at the other abstracts, like I just went to there's an environmental sustainability subgroup that kind of pulls from different disciplines, but is more topical focused. So, you might find one or two to go to, but to try to kind of cover the whole conference, I think is too overwhelming. Yeah. So that's my advice.
So do you think is the overwhelming part the size of the presentation, the amount of stuff that's here to do, or the amount of people that are here, or both?
I think it's when you're coming in, I think it's the number of concurrent sessions.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of people, but if
Right.
you know where you're going,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter as much. So I think it's also, if you just are reading the titles, they all sound interesting. Like it's hard to just be like, oh no, I definitely don't want to go to those. Like they're all like,
Yeah.
ooh, I might need to know that. So you get easily kind of
Right.
running around and people talk about, session hopping and stuff. And I'm just, at this point in my life, I'm like, I'm not going to run around to anything. Like I'm just going to pick a session and stay.
Pick a track.
And kind of deep, dig in deep and see people in between the sessions and so on. So yeah, I think it's a great organization because it's so big. They have many more resources than I'm also in the Society for Risk Analysis, but they don't have any full-time technical staff. They're really, it's a smaller society, and they have fewer concurrent sessions, but it's also so INFORMS has a lot of benefits that they have the staff and the infrastructure, but you just have to figure out how to kind of navigate within the meetings. Okay.
So speaking of other INFORMS benefits,
yes,
member benefits, what do you think is the most valuable as a member?
To me, the society, the Decision Analysis Society that is really the whole reason I'm part of INFORMS, because it is such a great community, and we have a journal, and it's a very it's a surprisingly small community for as big as the field is, but a lot of people also come in from other sections and kind of dabble in DADA is more of like a framework kind of approach, and then a lot of quantitative tools that are similar to operations research and other sections as well. Yeah. So having those sections and societies, and some of our members were talking about the history of kind of how there's ORSA and there's like all these things that kind of came together because they've been here through the whole thing. So I think it's having that ability to kind of have that small community within INFORMS is the biggest benefit that's worth it to me. So you were here before INFORMS was INFORMS? I was not. Oh, okay. But members we were there at our business meeting last night, they were saying, who's been the longest member of Decision Analysis Society? And they were saying, we were here before it was Decision Analysis Society. So they win. They win. Yeah. I think they were saying it was ORSA or something like that. But yes. Yeah, it was ORSA and TIMS combined. ORSA, okay. Yeah. Okay. So you're in the DC area, correct? Not right now. Not right now, but you were for a long time. Yes. What's your favorite Washington monument, or what? Not the Washington. When we lived there, my kids were little, and we love the FDR Memorial. I don't know if you've been there, but it's near the tidal basin where the cherry blossoms are. Yeah. But it's a little bit off the beaten path, and it's great for little kids because there's like pools of water. It's a lot of walkways, a lot of history, a lot of stuff to look at. Yeah. But not like as crowded, I guess, as some of the other monuments. Yeah. Thank you. So, what's your perfect birthday celebration? I think my perfect birthday celebration would be, waking up with an alarm, of course, obviously, and having a meal with my family, maybe yoga, walk outside with the dogs, and then, some kind of social gathering with some friends. Yeah. Quiet and calm. Yes. Yeah. But you still want to celebrate it. Some people just have, I don't want to. Yeah, no, I mean, it's better than the alternative. So I guess that's true. So anything else, any other hobbies, something interesting about you that might not be found on a professional resume? One thing that I haven't talked about in a long time, because now I've been in the same place for a long time, but when I was younger, by the time I turned 30, I lived in 9 states and the District of Columbia. And then since then I've lived in 2 more states. So I've seen a lot of Midwest, East Coast kind of, but I've seen a lot of different kind of states and cities. And I didn't realize in DC that's not uncommon, but now I live in Ohio, and that a lot of people have just lived in Ohio their whole life. So, I've lived in a lot of different places, and I think that's added to kind of my curiosity and, interest in kind of seeing how things are done in different places and how cultures are different and the same. And so before you were 30, 9 states and DC. Yeah. So were you moving consistently, or were you in one place for the majority? I was around Chicago for the most time, but my dad worked for a company that would move every 3 or 4 years. Yeah. So until I was in 5th grade, we moved every 2 or 3 years. And then so I graduated high school in Illinois, and then I never lived in Illinois again. I kind of went to Michigan, and then I kind of bumped around on that path where I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life.
But the majority of it was as a kid.
Yeah. Well, no, then it was like 4 or 5 as a kid, and then 4 or 5 as an adult. It was like, it was like a year fellowship, a 2-year master's degree, a year,
Yeah.
So it was a lot of moving around until I hit 30.
So what was your favorite state to live in?
I loved DC when I didn't have kids. We lived in the city, and we had a lot of friends there from grad school, and it's just now we have I have friends that are PhD students that are finishing, and they're like, I don't know if I could live in DC after living in Ohio, and I'm like, you've got to go. Like, it's so fun when you can just go to happy hours and everything. All the museums are free, and like there's so much going on. Then we were there, we still lived in the city, and we had a single family home up in Northwest when we had kids, and it was just hard because we both worked for the government, so we couldn't afford the private schools, and schools were tricky. We were in a charter school, and then we ended up having this opportunity to move to Ohio, and then it was much easier. But DC, if you're not dealing with schools and districts and all that logistics stuff, yes, then but that was my favorite.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for taking the time today. I really appreciate being here.
Thank you for having me.